4:6 it says, "Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone." The topic today is on the art of conversation, which can be quite messy and muddly at times, even though we have the very best intentions and use a good working model. Medical doctors have done some seriously impressive studies on conversation, showing that human dialogue can affect our hearts and even alter the biochemistry of tissues in the furthest extremities of our bodies. The quality of our communication, they say, impacts the quality of our lives. Ralph Emerson said, "It is a luxury to be understood," and the choice that we make, that each of us can make in our conversations geared towards understanding others, is indeed an extravagant gift. What's really interesting about communication is that it requires so much more than just a good working model. And very often when people work through a communication model in less than a minute or two, the familiar criticism or contempt has leaked into the exercise, even though the model has not allowed for it. The reason for this is that we bring our histories, our past experiences, and our personal meanings of words and gestures to a current conversation. Deborah Tannen, who is a phenomenal linguistic specialist, explains that at any given point, there is not only the message, but the meta-message occurring in our conversations. The message is the meaning of the actual words that we speak, but the meta-message is the unspoken message about the relationship between the speaker and the hearer. What is said by the way something was said, or who says it, or the fact that it was said at all. "Are you having another piece of cake?" can be humorous if spoken by one person and incredibly hurtful if spoken by another. It's because words can carry meanings that are missed by an unaware observer. There are the already spokens that we step into in a conversation. This is what has been said before, the way it has been said or interpreted, and our previous mistakes from yesterday show up in tomorrow's conversations. Now, one of the antidotes for meta-messages is to engage in something called meta-communication. That means communicating about how we are communicating, having a conversation about our conversations. And this requires a commitment to honesty. My husband and I have a phrase that we promise each other to apply to our meta-conversations. My job is to tell the truth, and your job is to believe me, and vice versa. This is very tricky as it requires vulnerability and integrity, and it also requires allowing the speaker a safe place to talk, which means not camping out on a specific word or phrase and then using it against them as ammunition, which is a tendency in some of our conversations. Here we need to remember to stick with our goals, moving away from defensiveness and criticism and into understanding. And these conversations, although they're quite difficult, they build trust over the long haul. There are formal degrees in communication that can take many years to complete, and the theories of communication are so rich and fascinating. And every time I read a book on the topic, it reminds me how much more I still need to learn. But the topic that is often unattended to when discussing communication is the topic of the heart. And in the book of Proverbs, known as the Book of Wisdom, in chapter 4, verse 23, it says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." The heart has a tendency to direct conversation, particularly regarding the esteem and worth that we place on ourselves and on others. You see, valuing ourselves and others allows for what is called transactional dialogue. It's the you talk, I talk conversation where everyone counts enough to talk. And it also shows up in our ability to express what we need in our relationships and how much we will value each other's expressions of their needs. Eric Byrne explained in a fascinating book called The Games People Play that in some conversations, we play one of three roles: the parent, the child, or the adult. And while we don't want to lose aspects of the freedom and spontaneity of the child, nor the nurturing voice of the parent, as that can be incredibly encouraging, it's really helpful to be aware of the controlling or critical parent role that we step into. This is when we're quick to anger, pointing out faults, often with impatient body language, finger pointing, patronizing gestures, or generally talking down to others. We could also take on the role in our transactions of what is called the adaptive child. This is sometimes marked by dishonest compliance, saying yes when we want to say no, sometimes driven by needs for approval, or just being plainly outwardly rebellious and non-cooperative, resorting to temper tantrums and outbursts. The goal, of course, is in conversation, particularly difficult ones, is for two equal adults to show up and engage. When we allow the adult to be our driver, we have a genuine regard and value for the person that we are interacting with. We focus on the here and now. We're present in the conversation and we're attentive and interested. Adults genuinely want to know the what's, the whys, the hows, the whos, not as a socially learned acceptable question or something that we should ask, but because of the overflow of heart value. They care both for themselves and for the other. And in Burns' model and many others added since then, when disagreeing, the adult uses language like my view, my experience, or I think, indicating a value for other people's opinions and a value for their own. Adults can place boundaries on their own behavior and set limits on how they are treated. They can respect the boundaries of others and their requests without losing love or value for the person. Adults use I language expressing what they need. It's always helpful to remember that these conversations can still be messy as we muddle through with many stops and starts. And John Stewart explains in a brilliant book called Bridges Not Walls that in some situations it's not always possible, wise, or sensible to treat everyone as an intimate friend, as the amount of power and hostility can make it too risky. And Ephesians 4:29 gives us some excellent advice for conversation. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, so that it may benefit those that listen. Before we talk, a good question to ask is it wholesome? Is it helpful? Will this build? Will it benefit the listener? And then being aware of what we are really feeling and thinking in the moment. Are we valuing ourselves? Are we valuing the person we're speaking to? And asking, what is our goal for this conversation? And would that line up with God's goal? Can be very challenging and profoundly valuable for healthy conversations to occur. I'll see you soon.
To remember is pieces of promise you keep. Oh, pieces.